In 1993, a young woman living and working in Chapel Hill is unexpectedly murdered while out for her early morning run. The arrest of the suspect, a young black high school student, instantly sparked outrage in the community, as did the outcome of his trial. Years later, when two local black males abduct and murder the promising student body president at UNC just blocks away from campus, residents of the area once again wonder why their previous crimes weren't enough to keep them in jail before they were able to commit violent murders. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Episode 133, The Murders of Kristin Lodge-Miller and Eve Carson. On the morning of July 15, 1993, 26-year-old Chapel Hill resident Kristin Lodge-Miller left her apartment for her daily run. Kristin was an avid runner who kept a log of her routes and times in a journal at home. She lived in a residential neighborhood but was still apprehensive about jogging alone, so her husband bought her a can of mace for her keychain. Around 6 a.m., a young man accosted her as she jogged down a local running trail on Estes Drive. Kristin had time to spray him with her mace and tried to get away from him. He chased her in front of several witnesses driving to work, about 1,200 feet, before shooting her in the back. He shot her multiple times with a .32 caliber handgun before standing over her body and firing one final shot into the back of her head as she lay bleeding on the ground. She was murdered less than a half mile from the police station. The suspect fled the scene on a bicycle. Kristin was born in Iowa City, Iowa, and attended the University of Iowa, earning a degree in speech-language pathology. After meeting Eric Miller, the man she would eventually marry, she went back to her hometown and the University of Iowa to earn a master's degree. She and Eric, who'd been married for 4 years, moved to Chapel Hill in 1992 so he could enroll at the University of North Carolina for graduate school. She found a job as a speech therapist. He left for a summer internship in San Diego, California in June of 1993, and Kristin had visited him in early July, just a few weeks before her murder. Police quickly arrested 18-year-old Anthony George Simpson and charged him with murder and attempted rape. According to the News and Observer, Simpson had moved to Chapel Hill from Norfolk, Virginia about 8 months earlier. He had attended Chapel Hill High School, but quickly fell behind in his subjects. He was living with his mother, Karen Simpson, in a condo in an upscale community. The media reported that Ethan Horton, a former UNC football player, owned the condo. When the murder occurred, Simpson's mom was out of town, and he was staying at home alone. 4 people who witnessed the shooting were able to describe the assailant, and a police officer heading into work when the call about the murder went out was in the right place at the right time. He found Simpson hiding between 2 air conditioner units at the Church of Reconciliation on Elliott Road a short time later, less than a mile from where the murder occurred. The young man eventually led police to an abandoned shed off Estes Drive where he had discarded the murder weapon. His fingerprints matched those found on the ammunition clip in the gun. Simpson's teen years had been full of conflict. In 1992, he was charged with assault, and a few months later, he was arrested on charges of stealing a car. After moving to Chapel Hill, Simpson was once again caught stealing a car with another juvenile acquaintance of his. They drove for 200 miles before being stopped by the police. The week prior to Kristin's murder, a judge had opted not to sentence Simpson to jail time for the car theft, instead assigning him community service. When officers from the Chapel Hill Police Department initially questioned Simpson, they said he was arrogant and cocky. He declined to call his mother, saying he could take care of himself. Orange County District Attorney Carl Fox, who was involved in last week's episode about the murders of Curtis Bain and Thad Hayes, prepared to take Kristin Lodge-Miller's murder case to trial. He told news outlets he would prosecute the case as first-degree murder and first-degree attempted rape as a death penalty case, and wasn't willing to accept any plea bargains. James Williams, a public defender with Orange County, had taken on Anthony Simpson's case. Kristin's murder was the topic of many op-eds that ran in the local newspapers at the time. As columnist John Baer wrote in the July 26, 1993 edition of the Chapel Hill Herald, as difficult as it is to see past the emotional aspects of the crime, it's important to understand the events that provided Simpson with the opportunity to prey upon a defenseless woman. Baer pointed out that Simpson had been granted a deferred prosecution, which is an option prosecutors can give people charged with crimes a second chance. Defendants can express interest in deferred prosecution, which means their court case will be postponed, usually for a few months, and prosecutors agree to dismiss the original charges if the defendant holds up their end of the arrangement. 1 week before Kristin was murdered, Simpson was granted a deferred prosecution in the charges of the car theft, even though he'd also been arrested in Virginia on similar charges. He'd agreed to perform community service as part of his agreement, but before he'd completed 1 hour of that community service, he committed murder. Baer expressed that it's difficult to know which defendants will do well with deferred prosecution terms and which won't. He wrote, "Prosecutors cannot be expected to be prescient enough to know which of the criminals who are granted deferred prosecutions will use the second chance to turn their lives around, and which ones will sneer at the court system and keep committing crimes. But when a teenage summer school dropout with prior criminal arrests is charged with stealing a car, a red flag ought to go up in any district attorney's office." Anthony Simpson's trial began in Hillsborough in early May of 1994, less than a year after Kristin's murder. It lasted 9 days, and the jury, comprised of 9 women and 3 men, spent 11 hours deliberating Simpson's fate. At one point, the jury was nearly deadlocked. The members had the opportunity to find Simpson guilty of several different crimes: first-degree premeditated murder, first-degree felony murder, and first-degree attempted rape. During the course of the trial, Simpson's defense team didn't deny that he had murdered Kristin, but they argued that the state's case about the attempted rape was speculative. The assistant public defender for Orange and Chatham counties, Robert Trenkle, said there was reasonable doubt in whether Simpson was planning to sexually assault Kristin. He asked the jurors to consider a second-degree murder conviction, saying his client shot Kristin in a fit of rage when she sprayed him with the mace she carried on her keychain. District Attorney Carl Fox pointed to the fact that Simpson was armed with a gun when he grabbed her off the trail as a direct indicator of his plans to commit rape. Members of the jury later told the media they did not believe Simpson murdered Kristin as a result of a failed sexual assault. They thought he likely snapped after being sprayed with a mace as Kristin defended herself. When the jury returned their verdict, the community was divided on whether justice was served. Anthony George Simpson was convicted of second-degree murder. The jury found reasonable doubt with the attempted rape charge and cleared the young man of it. According to the book North Carolina Crimes, a guidebook on the elements of crime, first-degree murder is defined as a person killing another human being with malice and a specific intent to kill, formed after premeditation and deliberation or by poisoning, lying in wait, imprisonment, starvation, or torture while committing or attempting arson, rape, or a sex offense, robbery, burglary, kidnapping, or any felony in which a deadly weapon is used. Second-degree murder is when a person kills another human being with a malice. Because malice can be inferred from the intentional use of a deadly weapon to inflict harm, the offense of a second-degree murder can be established by showing a voluntary unlawful killing committed with a deadly weapon. During the sentencing phase of the trial, Simpson's mother, Karen, took the stand to testify for the defense. She told the jury her son had witnessed acts of domestic abuse during his childhood, along with estrangement and broken promises from his biological father. She admitted the gun used in the murder belonged to a relative and her son had taken it from their condo. On her way back from the stand, she could be seen stopping to grasp the hands of Kristin's mother and whispering the words, "I'm sorry." Anthony Simpson told Judge Gordon Battle, "Judge, I know I've committed a bad crime. I'll take any punishment you give me." The judge sentenced him to the maximum allowed for a second-degree murder charge, life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. That meant Simpson could have become eligible for parole at the same age Kristin Lodge-Miller was when she was murdered. In the days following the verdict, the opinion pages were filled with letters from community members, all voicing a variety of opinions. Some accused the jurors of being influenced by racist activists. Others pointed out that although Anthony Simpson was a young black male, he technically fell into the middle-class income level and could not lean on the economically disadvantaged defense. Others wondered why a man who admitted to committing a cold-blooded murder was let off with such a light sentence. A spokesperson at the Orange County Rape Crisis Center said they had been flooded with calls, sparked by outrage that members of the jury failed to find that Anthony Simpson acted deliberately and with premeditation when he shot Kristin. The executive director of the center, Margaret Henderson, told the Chapel Hill Herald, "The message this verdict sends out is if a woman defends herself, she provides a mitigating circumstance for her attacker. It has the ultimate effect of minimizing the importance of violence against women." Kathleen Hopwood, who at the time co-owned a local Triangle business that taught women self-defense skills, said, "What brought this 18-year-old boy out at 5 o'clock in the morning on a bike with a gun? He's a predator. This verdict says it's okay to murder women. For me, it says you'd better learn to defend yourself, because if you don't, your family's not even going to have any justice." On May 29, 1994, the Chapel Hill News ran a guest column from a clinical associate professor of law at the University of North Carolina School of Law. Michelle Robertson explained that the jury in the trial simply relied on the evidence to hand down their verdict. She pointed to the fact that it was first a detective who suggested to Simpson that he grabbed Kristin because he wanted to have sex with her. She said the eyewitnesses had conflicting testimonies. None of the evidence showed Simpson was trying to drag Kristin into the woods, and she didn't have any torn clothing when her body was found. She said the evidence, as presented by the state, didn't support a finding of attempted rape. It only showed Simpson murdered Kristin in a fit of rage when she tried to defend herself. We will never know if he grabbed Kristin because he wanted to rob her or sexually assault her, but the fact remains that Simpson did murder her. This case only demonstrates how difficult it can be to follow the letter of the law in such a heartbreaking case. While the headlines at the time pointed out that Anthony George Simpson could be released as early as 10 years after his sentence, I found an article online that was published in May of 2003 when he was up for parole. The writer reported he had accumulated 28 infractions while in prison, including a sexual offense. Now in his late 40s, he is currently still incarcerated in North Carolina, with the list of infractions on his record having grown to 47. They range from profane language to disobeying orders to fighting to sexual acts. Before we continue, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. I had been unhappy with my old podcast host for a while and was looking for other options. I discovered Riverside FM and learned that for one low monthly fee, it would help me record the podcast and utilize video capabilities. It uses AI technology to easily create clips from each episode that I can then share on my social media accounts. I don't consider myself to be very tech savvy, but audio and video editing with Riverside FM software has been a breeze, and I look forward to recording days now. If you're looking for a company that will help you with all your podcasting, webinar, and video needs, I encourage you to check out Riverside FM. You won't be disappointed. I'll include a link for you in the show notes. There are a lot of trends floating around on social media on the best way to keep your skin looking hydrated and youthful. But I don't like to follow fads, especially when I find a product that really works. Enter the products from SkinX Erin. I use her Pre-Cleanse Oil, Hydrating Beauty Oil, and Perfecting Night Oil, and I was hooked from the first drops. The Pre-Cleanse gently removes dirt, impurities, and even waterproof makeup without tugging, stripping, or drying out your skin. In addition to keeping your skin clear, it also helps your skin feel firmer and reduces the signs of aging. The Hydrating Beauty Oil is a powerful and effective skin hydrator that never leaves your skin feeling greasy. The signature squalane oil is known for its anti-inflammatory and anti-aging properties. It's perfect for treating skin conditions like acne and eczema and reducing the appearance of wrinkles. The Perfecting Night Oil is loaded with vitamins E and A and is rich with antioxidants and omegas that nourish skin, replenish elasticity, and reduce stretch marks. A few drops a day leave skin smoother, more vibrant, and youthful. My skin instantly drinks in these oils, and I've never had a problem with them leaving residue on my clothes or sheets at night, only giving me a healthy glow that my husband often compliments me on. Want to try out the products for yourself? Go to shopxaaron.com and use the code MissingCarolinas10 for a 10% discount on your order. And now, let's get back to the show. On March 5th, 2008, another young woman from Chapel Hill was murdered. And for longtime residents, the shock of the crime and innocence of the victim couldn't help but remind them of Kristin's murder back in 1993. Eve Marie Carson was a 22-year-old senior at the University of North Carolina, majoring in political science and biology. She hailed from Athens, Georgia, where she excelled both academically and in sports. An article that ran in the News and Observer in the days following her murder highlighted her many accomplishments. She was a competitive soccer player and graduated from Clark Central High School as the class president and valedictorian. She won a Moorhead Kane Scholarship at UNC, which covers the full cost of 4 years at the university, along with a stipend for summer enrichment activities. She continued to pursue her love of learning and giving back to others by serving as a mentor to local Chapel Hill and Durham schools and volunteering during her summers at places like Ecuador, Egypt, and Ghana. A member of the Pi Beta Kappa Honor Society, she ran for UNC's student body president during the spring of her junior year and won with 55% of the vote. In her role, she served as a member of the Board of Trustees, deciding how student fees were spent at the university and advocating for lower tuition rates. She served on numerous committees, coached a running program for girls ages 8 to 13, and encouraged her fellow Moorhead scholars to get engaged in a variety of projects. The executive director of the Moorhead Kane Foundation at the time said, "You were motivated to do something in the world if you were around Eve." Eve Carson, like Kristin Lodge-Miller before her, could have been any one of us. She was simply living the life of a busy college student in the early morning hours of March 5th, 2008. That week had been full of activities for Eve. She attended a fan appreciation event sponsored by Nike, where she received a special pair of Carolina blue shoes, and she attended the UNC Florida State basketball game at the Dean Smith Center. Eve lived with a few different roommates at a home on Friendly Lane, just a few blocks away from campus. Around 1:30 a.m., her roommates left the house, with Eve staying behind to study. Shortly before 4 a.m., Eve exited the home and was forced into her 2005 blue Toyota Highlander by unknown assailants. She didn't leave the home willingly. From what police later reported, someone made 2 transactions totaling $700 from Eve's bank account at 2 different nearby Bank of America ATMs. This person attempted to withdraw money 5 more times, but was unsuccessful. Around 4:30 a.m., one of Eve's roommates returned home to find the door to their home open, with the lights still on, and Eve's car missing from the driveway. He tried to call her cell phone, but got no response. Around 5 a.m. that morning, a woman named Alexandria Bakinski called 911 from the Hillcrest neighborhood, located close to the UNC campus, when she was awakened by a woman's scream and what she believed were gunshots. After police received reports of those possible gunshots, they headed to the neighborhood to investigate. There, they found a young blonde-haired woman lying in the street. She was wearing a dark blue t-shirt, gray sweatpants, and white athletic shoes. She was deceased, with no forms of identification on her body. One of Eve's roommates became concerned the next day when she still hadn't heard from her. She went to the Chapel Hill Police Department, where she learned about the victim they'd found and helped identify her roommate and friend. Around that same time, someone was still using Eve's ATM card to withdraw money from local ATMs. That afternoon, a local resident noticed a blue Toyota Highlander she'd seen featured on the news and called the police to report it being located near the intersection of North and Hillsborough Streets. The SUV was confirmed to be Eve's, and it was unattended. The day after her death, students on campus mourned the loss of their student body president by holding a candlelight vigil at the pit on campus. The bell tower played the song, "Hark the Sound of Tar Heel Voices." Students shared their memories of the charismatic student. One young man, who had met Eve through the Moorhead Scholars Program, told the News and Observer, "She embodies the word beautiful in every shape of the definition, in spirit, mind, and heart. When she talked to you, she just made you feel like you were something special. This really is unimaginable." Early on in the investigation, police were able to obtain photos of a person using Eve's ATM card, and he appeared to be a black male. They asked the public for help identifying the suspect. They also noticed in some of the surveillance footage they viewed that there appeared to be a second person in the backseat of Eve's SUV during the abduction. The local police released additional videos from the Carolina Food Mart where suspects had used Eve's card to withdraw even more cash. On March 9th, Eve Carson's family held her funeral at the First Methodist Church in Athens, Georgia. Just a few days after releasing the surveillance videos, investigators received a tip pointing them to two suspects. On March 13, 2008, local police officers arrested 21-year-old Demario James Atwater at his home in Durham, charging him with first-degree murder. They announced a second suspect, 17-year-old Lawrence Alvin Lovett Jr., was still at large and considered to be armed and dangerous. He surrendered to police not long after and was charged with first-degree murder. Police later charged Lovett in the murder of Duke University graduate student Abhijit Mahato, age 29, which had occurred only a few months earlier. An informant later told police Atwater and Lovett entered Eve's home through an unlocked door and abducted her, forcing her to give them her ATM PIN number so they could withdraw money from her bank account. While Lovett was only 17 years old, it soon became apparent that he had a lengthy juvenile criminal record and should not have been released from a previous incarceration. At age 15, not long after the death of his father, he broke into a neighbor's car and took her purse and car keys. 2 weeks later, someone stole her vehicle. 5 days after that, despite having changed the locks at her home, someone broke into her family's house. Lovett was eventually charged with the crimes and was sent to a youth detention center, where he was released after 14 months. Just a few months after being released, he broke into a couple's home in the middle of the night, got arrested, and was charged with 3 felonies as an adult. But because he had been released from a juvenile prison, prosecutors struck a deal and asked him to plead guilty to 3 misdemeanors, where he was sentenced to 2 years of probation on January 16, 2008. He never met with his adult probation officer, and 2 days later, Abhijit Mahato was murdered. But Lovett had a crime spree that escalated after that. He was arrested on burglary and car theft charges and was released on bail. Then Eve Carson was murdered. The News and Observer reached out to Durham District Attorney David Sachs, and he pointed out that juvenile records are closed to the public based on the theory that mistakes occurring during a person's younger years shouldn't be held against them. It appears Lovett's case just kept slipping through the cracks, and he got more leniency from the courts than he deserved due to his young age. The judge who reduced Lovett's charges on breaking and entering from felonies to misdemeanors had no idea of his lengthening. The judge who reduced Lovett's charges on breaking and entering from felonies to misdemeanors had no idea of his lengthy juvenile record when she released him on adult probation. She later told the News and Record that had she known, she never would have released him. Demario Atwater had also slipped through the cracks. He had charges of felony breaking and entering and larceny on his record as far back as January of 2005. He received 3 years probation, but for some reason, the probation was under the jurisdiction of Wake County, even though he lived in Durham. In Granville County, he was charged for possession of a firearm in June of 2007, which should have meant a parole violation. Granville County notified Wake County of these charges. In November of 2007, paperwork was filed in Wake County about his parole violation, and a warrant was issued for him at an unknown address, according to reporting by news station WRAL. Atwater was arrested on February 20th, 2008, and released on a $10,000 secured bond. But when he arrived for his court hearing, it had been sent to a different courtroom. The clerk of court told Atwater and his attorney the computer system didn't show the violation for the 2005 conviction and that the case had been disposed. Just a few days later, Atwater abducted and murdered Eve Carson along with Lawrence Lovett Jr. On June 30th, 2008, The North Carolina Medical Examiner's Office released Eve Carson's autopsy report, which revealed she had been shot 5 different times. In her final moments, she shielded her face with her hand before being shot in the temple with a shotgun. The suspects used 2 different weapons, a .25 caliber handgun and a shotgun. On April 19, 2010, Atwater pleaded guilty to federal charges of carjacking resulting in death, kidnapping resulting in death, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and possession of a short-barreled shotgun without such a weapon being properly registered. He agreed to a term of life in prison. In December 2011, Lovett went on trial. One of Atwater and Lovett's acquaintances, Jason McNeil, testified about what they told him happened on the morning of Eve's murder. They abducted her from her home, forced her into her SUV, held a gun to her head, and forced her to give them her ATM card. After withdrawing money from several places, she pleaded for her life. They said they would have to kill her since she had seen their faces. Instead, she asked them to pray with her. They murdered her anyway. The jury found Lovett guilty of first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, first-degree armed robbery, felonious larceny, and felonious possession of stolen goods. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole for murder and 177 months in prison for the other charges. 2 years later, Superior Court Judge Alan Bador changed Lovett's sentence to life in prison without the possibility of parole, saying he didn't believe the man had a chance of being rehabilitated. Lovett spoke about Eve's murder for the first time at his hearing, saying, "You know, people make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. I'm not the monster that y'all made me out to be. I know that this has been a traumatic ordeal for everybody involved. For that, I send my condolences to everybody who's been affected by it. If it means anything to anybody, it means something to me." An appeals court upheld his new sentence on May 6, 2014. In July of 2014, Lovett went on trial for the murder of Duke University graduate student Abhijit Mahato. Prosecutors argued that his murder paralleled Eve Carson's. Mahato was forced to go to an ATM to withdraw money before being taken back to his apartment and being shot to death with a 9mm pistol. But the state didn't have any physical evidence corroborating their case. They relied on the testimony of a witness, the ex-girlfriend of Demario Atwater. She said she'd heard Lovett discussing the murder with Atwater. The jury struggled with the fact that the ex-girlfriend's testimony changed a few different times, and prosecutors were not able to present a weapon, fingerprint, or DNA evidence tying Lovett to the murder. They found him not guilty. He was returned to prison to continue serving out his life sentence for Eve Carson's murder. In the months following Eve's murder, the University of North Carolina established a scholarship in her name to commemorate and celebrate her life. The mission of this scholarship was one Eve firmly believed in, a way to honor and reward rising seniors at the school who had grown significantly in the areas of academics, social justice, and leadership. Eve had hoped to create the existence of a student-run, merit-based scholarship for upperclassmen at the university. Below is part of a speech Eve gave when she ran for student body president. Some students work to support themselves financially in high school and are thus unable to hold leadership positions or participate as deeply as other students in extracurriculars, preventing them from being considered for merit scholarships at the college entrance level. And many students' eyes are opened after coming to college when they discover an activity or a cause which particularly impassions them. But at that point, it is too late to apply for merit or honor scholarships, and so they help fund their college education by seeking financial aid or a work-study program. That is a shame because many of UNC's greatest leaders and public servants found their passion after coming to college, and many also have to face the choice between getting more involved with their student organization or activity and working to contribute money towards college. UNC rewards very few students for anything other than high school activities and accomplishments. Both Demario Atwater and Lawrence Lovett Jr. remain incarcerated. In an article that ran on ABC News after Eve Carson's murder, the reporter wrote about the parallels between Kristin Lodge-Miller and Eve Carson's murders. The article read in part, As details of Carson's death emerged last week, Chapel Hill residents quickly learned that they must yet again cope with a violent clash between the largely affluent, advantaged world of the UNC campus and the more impoverished communities that surround the college. End quote. My own daughter was in elementary school when Eve Carson was murdered, but the news of her death never left my mind. Both of my children are now in college, and my daughter is at a university that very much resembles the campus of the University of North Carolina, meaning the campus and the area immediately surrounding it are beautiful and well-maintained, but crime is present everywhere, and you can run into trouble just a few blocks away. With Eve's story in mind, I've always reminded my daughter to be observant of her surroundings at all times and to never leave her apartment late at night unless absolutely necessary. I was not as careful when I was 22 years old, living the life of what I felt was an invincible college student. Stories like these remind us just how vulnerable we really are. This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd also like to support the show in a small way, you can buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com, Renee Robertson. Thank you so much for those who have already supported me through this platform. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. Sound editing is provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.